The iron gates were 15 feet high and crowned with decorative spikes that looked sharp enough to impale, which was probably the point, and beyond them stretched a driveway lined with manicured hedges that disappeared around a curve toward what Lily could only assume was a mansion that matched the ostentatious security measures. She had been standing here for 20 minutes, her finger pressed against the call button mounted on the stone pillar beside the gate, listening to the buzz echo through the speaker without any response, and her patience, already worn threadbare by 3 days of searching and dead ends and the crushing weight of fear for her sister's safety, had finally evaporated completely. "I know you can hear me," Lily shouted at the camera mounted above the call box, her voice hoarse from exhaustion and the November cold that had seeped into her bones during the hour-long bus ride to this exclusive neighborhood where the houses were hidden behind walls and the streets were patrolled by private security. "I know someone is watching. I'm not leaving until I talk to Vincenzo Moretti. My sister is in there, and I'm not going anywhere without her." The words hung in the frigid air, and for a moment Lily thought they would simply dissipate unanswered like all her previous attempts to get information. She had started at the police station 3 days ago, when she had come home from her double shift at the diner, to find their tiny apartment empty and Chloe's phone going straight to voicemail. The police had been sympathetic but ultimately useless, explaining that 19-year-olds had the right to go where they wanted and that Chloe had to be missing for 48 hours before they could really do anything. By the time 48 hours had passed and Lily had filed an official report, she had already tracked Chloe's last known movements to a nightclub in the expensive part of town, had bullied information out of Chloe's roommate about a man named Marco who worked for the Moretti family, and had connected enough dots to understand that her idealistic, naive little sister had gotten herself tangled up with organized crime. And now Lily was standing outside what was effectively a fortress, demanding entrance from people who could make her disappear without consequence, because the alternative was going home and waiting and hoping and slowly losing her mind with the knowledge that Chloe was in danger, and Lily had once again failed to protect her. The speaker crackled to life with a burst of static that made Lily jump, and a male voice emerged, bored and slightly amused. "Miss, this is private property. You need to leave before we call the police." "Call them!" Lily shot back, her hands clenched into fists at her sides to stop them from shaking. "I'll tell them exactly why I'm here and who I'm looking for. I'm sure the police would be very interested in having a conversation with Vincenzo Moretti about his business associates and what they've been doing with teenage girls." The silence that followed felt weighted and dangerous, and Lily realized with a sick lurch in her stomach that she had just threatened a man who probably had the police in his pocket and who could silence her with a single phone call. She should apologize, should back down, should run before whatever consequences she had just triggered caught up with her. But the thought of Chloe, sweet, trusting Chloe, who had only been trying to help pay for Lily's nursing school tuition by taking a waitressing job at the wrong club, kept her rooted to the spot, her chin lifted in defiance, even though her legs were trembling beneath her worn jeans. The gates began to open with a smooth mechanical hum, swinging inward to reveal the curved driveway beyond. No voice came through the speaker, no instructions or warnings, just the silent invitation that could just as easily be a threat. Lily's rational mind screamed at her to run, to get as far from this place as possible while she still could. But she thought about Chloe's last text message. "Don't worry about me. I'm safe. I'll call you soon," sent 48 hours before she disappeared, and forced her feet to move forward. The walk up the driveway felt like moving through a dream, each step taking tremendous effort, as though she were wading through water. The hedges were perfectly trimmed, the stones beneath her feet immaculate, and everything about the approach screamed money and power, and the kind of privilege that came from controlling things that existed outside the law. The mansion came into view as she rounded the curve, and Lily had to resist the urge to stop and stare like a tourist. It was massive, 3 stories of pale stone with tall windows that reflected the weak afternoon sun, columns flanking the entrance, and a fountain in the circular drive that probably cost more than Lily would earn in 5 years of working double shifts. Two men in dark suits stood on either side of the front door, their postures relaxed, but their eyes sharp as they tracked Lily's approach. She could see the bulges beneath their jackets that suggested weapons, could see the way they communicated with small gestures and subtle movements, and felt her anxiety spike into something approaching terror. These were not men who would hesitate to hurt her if ordered to do so. These were professionals who had probably done worse things than rough up a desperate woman looking for her sister. Lily stopped at the base of the steps leading to the front door, tilting her head back to meet the gaze of the man on the left. "I'm here to see Vincenzo Moretti, about my sister, Chloe Winters. I'm not leaving until I talk to him." The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes that might have been surprise or possibly respect. "Mr. Moretti doesn't take unscheduled meetings." "Then he can schedule one right now," Lily said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Or I can start making phone calls to every news outlet in the city about how the Moretti family is involved in whatever happened to my 19-year-old sister. I'm sure they'd be very interested in that story." It was a bluff. She had no evidence, no proof, nothing but the desperate conviction that Chloe's disappearance was connected to Marco, and therefore to the family he worked for. But something in her delivery must have been convincing, because the guard's jaw tightened and he pulled out his phone, speaking in rapid Italian that Lily couldn't follow. When he ended the call, he gestured toward the door with a slight inclination of his head. "Mr. Moretti will see you, but I need to search you first for weapons." Lily nodded and submitted to the pat-down with as much dignity as she could manage, her cheeks burning as the guard's hands moved professionally but thoroughly over her body. He found nothing because she had nothing, just her phone, her wallet, with its depressing lack of cash, and the desperate hope that Vincenzo Moretti would either tell her where Chloe was or give her enough information to continue searching. The interior of the mansion was exactly as intimidating as the exterior, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers and artwork that looked like it belonged in museums rather than private homes. Lily followed the guard through a series of hallways, trying to memorize the route in case she needed to run, until they reached a set of double doors that opened into what appeared to be a study. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined two walls, a massive desk dominated the space near the windows, and sitting in a leather chair behind that desk was a man who made every instinct Lily possessed scream at her to flee. Vincenzo Moretti was younger than she had expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair styled in a way that suggested expensive barbers and the kind of attention to appearance that came from being constantly photographed. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Lily's car, if she had still owned a car, and his face was all sharp angles and controlled expressions that revealed nothing of what he might be thinking. But it was his eyes that made Lily's breath catch, dark and intelligent, and assessing her with the same intensity a predator might use to evaluate prey. "Miss Winters, I presume," he said, his voice deep and carrying just a hint of an accent that made certain syllables flow like water. He didn't stand, didn't offer his hand, just regarded her with that unnerving intensity while she stood in the center of his study, feeling small and foolish, and completely out of her depth. "You've caused quite a commotion with your threats at my gate." "I wasn't threatening," Lily said, lifting her chin despite the way her heart was racing. "I was promising. If anything has happened to my sister, if your people have hurt her or are holding her somewhere, I will make sure everyone knows about it. I don't care who you are or what you can do to me. Chloe is all I have, and I'm not losing her." Something flickered across Vincenzo's face. Surprise, maybe, or possibly amusement, before his expression smoothed back into careful neutrality. He leaned back in his chair, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin as he studied her. "Tell me about your sister. Start from the beginning." Lily's first instinct was to refuse, to demand he tell her what he knew before she gave him any information. but something in his tone suggested this was the price of his attention. She swallowed hard and forced herself to speak calmly, despite the panic clawing at her chest. Chloe is 19. She's a freshman at the community college, studying to be a teacher. She took a waitressing job at Eclipse, that nightclub downtown, about 6 weeks ago because she wanted to help with my tuition for nursing school. 3 weeks ago, she told me she met someone, a man named Marco, who worked security at the club. She said he was sweet, that he treated her well, that I would like him. Lily's voice cracked slightly on the last words, and she had to pause to collect herself before continuing. 4 days ago, she told me she was going to spend the weekend with friends. She sent me a text saying she was safe and would call soon. That was the last time I heard from her. Her roommate told me Marco works for you, that he's part of your organization. So either you know where my sister is, or you can help me find her. Vincenzo was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes never leaving Lily's face. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Marco Rossi is one of my security personnel, yes, but I don't involve myself in the personal lives of my employees unless it becomes relevant to business. If your sister is with Marco, then she's with him because she chose to be, not because I ordered it or had any involvement. Then call him, Lily demanded, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Call him right now and ask him where Chloe is. I don't take orders in my own home, Miss Winters, Vincenzo said softly, but there was steel beneath the quiet words that made Lily's skin prickle with awareness of just how dangerous this man was. However, I will contact Marco because I'm curious about why a young woman would storm my gates making threats over a situation she doesn't fully understand. He pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking in Italian that was too rapid for Lily to follow even if she had known the language. She watched his expression change as he listened to whoever was on the other end, confusion giving way to something darker, his jaw clenching and his free hand curling into a fist on the desk. When he ended the call, the look he gave Lily was complicated and unreadable. Marco says he hasn't seen your sister in 3 days. She came to his apartment upset about something, stayed for a few hours, and then left. He assumed she went home to you. The words hit Lily like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs and making her legs threaten to give out beneath her. If Chloe wasn't with Marco, if she hadn't been here, then Lily had just wasted precious time pursuing a lead that went nowhere. She had been so certain, so convinced, that the connection to the Moretti family was the answer, and now she was back to having nothing. I need to see him, Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to talk to Marco myself. He's lying, or he's wrong, or… He's not lying, Vincenzo interrupted. I've known Marco since he was 16 years old. If he says your sister left his apartment 3 days ago, then that's what happened. But I am curious about what upset her enough to seek him out. And I'm curious about where she might have gone afterward. He stood, moving around the desk with the kind of controlled grace that suggested either training or natural athleticism. And suddenly, he was close enough that Lily could smell his cologne. Something expensive with notes of cedar and spice that made her acutely aware of how she must look and smell after 3 days of minimal sleep and maximum stress. She took an instinctive step back, but Vincenzo didn't advance further, just stood there studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. You remind me of someone, he said quietly. Someone who also refused to back down when everyone told her she should. Someone who was brave enough to storm into dangerous places demanding answers. His expression shifted, something painful flickering across his features before he controlled it. What do you want from me, Miss Winters? Really? I want you to help me find her, Lily heard herself say, the words emerging before her rational mind could stop them. You have resources, connections, people who can track down information that I can't access. If Chloe is in trouble, if she's hiding or being held somewhere, your people could find her. Please, I'll do whatever you want in return. I'll work for you. I'll owe you a favor. Don't. Vincenzo said sharply, his hand coming up in a gesture that stopped her mid-sentence. Don't offer open-ended deals to men like me, Miss Winters. You have no idea what I might ask for in return. The warning should have frightened her, should have made her take back the offer. But instead, Lily stepped closer, closing the distance between them, despite every instinct screaming at her to maintain space. I don't care. Chloe is all I have. Our parents died when she was 8 and I was 15. I raised her, I protected her. I made sure she had everything she needed, even when it meant I had nothing. And I failed her by letting her take that job, by not noticing something was wrong until it was too late. So whatever price you want to name for helping me find her, I'll pay it. Vincenzo stared at her for a long moment, and Lily watched something shift in his expression. The calculated assessment of a man, used to measuring threats giving way to something that looked almost like empathy. You didn't fail her, he said quietly. Young women make their own choices, and those choices sometimes lead them into danger, despite the best efforts of the people trying to protect them. But I will help you find your sister, Miss Winters. Not because you offered me a deal, but because I respect what it took for you to come here and demand answers from someone you knew was dangerous. The relief that washed over Lily was so intense it made her dizzy, and she swayed slightly before catching herself. Vincenzo's hand shot out to steady her, his grip firm but surprisingly gentle on her elbow, and the touch sent an unexpected jolt of awareness through her body that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the way his dark eyes were studying her face with concern rather than calculation. When's the last time you ate? He asked, and the question was so unexpected that Lily actually laughed. A slightly hysterical sound that made Vincenzo's expression shift towards something that might have been amusement. I don't remember. Yesterday, maybe? Food hasn't exactly been a priority. It is now, Vincenzo said firmly. He guided her toward a leather sofa against one wall and pressed her gently into the cushions before moving to a panel beside the door and pressing a button. You're no good to your sister if you collapse from exhaustion or malnutrition. We're going to get you fed, and then we're going to start making calls to find out what happened to Chloe. Lily wanted to protest that they didn't have time for her to eat, that every moment spent not searching was a moment Chloe could be in danger, but her body betrayed her by choosing that exact instant to make her stomach growl loudly enough that Vincenzo definitely heard it. His mouth quirked in what might have been a smile, before he schooled his expression back to careful neutrality. A woman in her 50s appeared in the doorway minutes later, and Vincenzo spoke to her in Italian before turning back to Lily. Maria is bringing you food. While you eat, I'm going to make some calls. Tell me everything you know about your sister's movements in the days before she disappeared. Places she went, people she talked to, anything unusual she mentioned. Lily found herself talking for the next 20 minutes while picking at the tray of food Maria brought. Expensive cheeses and fresh bread and fruit that tasted better than anything she had eaten in months. She told Vincenzo about Chloe's classes and her friends, and the way she had seemed distracted and worried in the weeks before disappearing. She told him about the text message that had said everything was fine, when Lily's instincts screamed that nothing was fine. And she told him about the sick feeling she had that Chloe had witnessed something or learned something that had put her in danger. Vincenzo listened with focused attention, occasionally making notes on his phone or asking clarifying questions, and Lily found herself unexpectedly reassured by his competence. This was a man who solved problems for a living, who navigated danger as easily as most people navigated morning commutes. If anyone could find Chloe, it was him. I have a theory, Vincenzo said, when Lily finally ran out of information to share. But you're not going to like it. Tell me anyway. Vincenzo leaned back against his desk, his arms crossed over his chest in a way that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders beneath the expensive suit. 3 days ago, one of my business associates had something stolen from him. Information that could be very dangerous in the wrong hands. He's been aggressively pursuing whoever took it. If your sister was at Eclipse that night, If she saw something or overheard something, she might have inadvertently put herself in the middle of a situation that has nothing to do with Marco and everything to do with being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Lily felt her blood run cold. You think someone from your world took her? Is holding her because of something she accidentally witnessed? I think it's possible, Vincenzo said carefully. And if that's what happened, then she's either hiding because she's smart enough to know she's in danger, or someone is keeping her quiet until they can determine whether she's a threat. Either way, I need to make some calls to people who might know more. But Miss Winters, Lily, he caught her gaze and held it with an intensity that made her chest tighten. If I'm right about this, then finding your sister means getting involved in business that could put you in danger too. Are you sure you want that? I don't care about my safety, Lily said immediately. I only care about getting Chloe back. That's what I thought you'd say, Vincenzo murmured, something that might have been admiration flickering across his face. Stay here. Don't leave this room until I come back. And Lily? Thank you for trusting me enough to tell me everything. He left before she could respond, and Lily found herself alone in the study with her half-eaten food and the slowly sinking realization that she had just tied herself to a man who operated in shadows and dealt with threats through means she didn't want to imagine. But if he could find Chloe, if he could bring her sister home safe, then Lily would accept whatever consequences came with that alliance. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of anxiety and forced stillness. Lily couldn't sit still, couldn't stop pacing the study while her mind conjured increasingly horrific scenarios about what might have happened to Chloe. She called Chloe's phone every 20 minutes, even though it continued to go straight to voicemail. She texted mutual friends, asking if anyone had heard from her sister. And she tried not to think about the fact that she had put her trust in a man who was essentially a stranger, who could be lying to her about helping, who might have his own agenda that had nothing to do with actually finding Chloe. When Vincenzo finally returned, his expression was grim enough that Lily's heart stopped in her chest. Did you find her? Is she? She's alive, Vincenzo said quickly, and Lily felt her legs give out in relief, her body sagging against the desk for support. But the situation is complicated. My business associate, the man who had information stolen, has her. Not as a prisoner exactly, but not entirely voluntarily either. He's keeping her at a safe house while he determines whether she's a threat or just an innocent bystander who happened to see something she shouldn't have. Where? Lily demanded, already moving toward the door. Take me to her now. Vincenzo caught her arm, his grip gentle but firm enough to stop her forward momentum. It's not that simple. The man holding your sister is unpredictable, dangerous. If I show up demanding he release her without explaining why, it could make things worse for Chloe. I need to negotiate this carefully. Then negotiate, Lily said desperately. Please, Vincenzo. You said you'd help me find her. You found her. Now help me get her back. Vincenzo stared at her for a long moment, and Lily watched something shift in his expression, the careful control giving way to something that looked almost like pain. You don't know what you're asking. Getting your sister released means calling in favors and making deals, and potentially putting myself in a difficult position with people I need to maintain relationships with. It means, I'll do anything, Lily interrupted. You said I shouldn't offer open-ended deals, but I'm offering anyway. Whatever you want in return for getting Chloe back safely, I'll give it to you. My life, my freedom, my… Stop, Vincenzo said roughly, his hands coming up to frame her face with surprising gentleness, despite the intensity in his eyes. Stop offering me things you don't understand the value of. I'll get your sister back, Lily. Not because you promised me anything, but because I've spent the last 3 hours listening to you talk about raising her and protecting her and sacrificing everything for her, and I can't walk away from that kind of love and desperation without doing something to help. Lily felt tears burning in her eyes, hot and overwhelming, and before she could stop herself, she was pressing her face against Vincenzo's chest, her fingers clutching the expensive fabric of his suit, while she sobbed with relief and exhaustion, and the terrifying vulnerability of having placed her trust in someone who could destroy her as easily as help her. Vincenzo's arms came around her slowly, carefully, as though he wasn't entirely sure what to do with a crying woman in his study, but was willing to figure it out. "Thank you," Lily whispered, when she finally had enough control to speak. "Thank you for helping us." "Don't thank me yet," Vincenzo said, quietly, his hand moving in slow circles on her back in a gesture that was more comforting than it had any right to be. "This isn't over, but I promise you, Lily, I will get your sister back." And standing in the study of a man she had known for less than 4 hours, feeling safer than she had in 3 days. Despite the danger implicit in everything he was, Lily allowed herself to believe him. The safe house was in a part of the city Lily had never visited, expensive enough to discourage curiosity, isolated enough to provide privacy for activities that couldn't bear scrutiny. Vincenzo drove them himself in a sleek black car that probably cost more than Lily would earn in 5 years, his hands steady on the wheel, while he explained the situation with the kind of clinical detachment that suggested he dealt with kidnappings and negotiations regularly. Roberto, the man holding Chloe, is convinced she saw something related to the stolen information. He won't hurt her unless he believes she's actively working against him, but he also won't release her until he's satisfied she's not a threat. Our job is to convince him that letting her go is in his best interests. "How do we do that?" Lily asked, her hands clenched together in her lap so tightly her knuckles were white. "We offer him something he wants more than the assurance of Chloe's silence," Vincenzo said, "me vouching for her. My personal guarantee that she's not a threat, and that if she becomes one, I'll handle it myself. That kind of assurance from me carries weight in our world." The casual way he said "our world" made Lily's chest tighten with awareness of just how different Vincenzo's life was from hers. She existed in a world of bus schedules and double shifts and scraping together enough money for rent. He existed in a world where personal guarantees could determine whether someone lived or died, where violence was a tool rather than something to be avoided, where power was measured in favors and connections rather than money alone. What happens if Chloe does become a threat? Lily heard herself ask. What happens if she tells someone what she saw, or goes to the police, or— "Then I deal with it," Vincenzo said flatly. "But that's not going to happen, because you're going to make sure your sister understands that staying silent is the only way to keep both of you safe. Can you do that, Lily?" The question hung in the air between them, and Lily understood what he was really asking. Could she live with the moral compromise of ensuring Chloe's silence about whatever criminal activity she had witnessed? Could she accept that her sister's safety came at the cost of becoming complicit in protecting people who operated outside the law? Yes, Lily said quietly, because the alternative was losing Chloe, and there was no universe in which that was acceptable. "I can do that." Vincenzo glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light from the dashboard. "You're braver than you think, showing up at my gate and demanding I help you. Most people are too afraid to even approach my home, let alone threaten me. Where did that courage come from?" "From not having any other choice," Lily said honestly. "When you're responsible for someone else's life, when you've raised them from childhood and promised them they'd be safe, you do whatever it takes, even things that terrify you, even asking for help from dangerous men who could hurt you as easily as help you." "I'm not going to hurt you," Vincenzo said, and there was something almost gentle in his voice, despite the hard edges of his life. "And for what it's worth, I think your sister is very lucky to have you fighting for her." The safe house looked like any other expensive suburban home from the outside, but the two men standing watch on the porch and the security cameras visible on the eaves made it clear this was something else entirely. Vincenzo parked in the driveway and turned to Lily with an expression that was both serious and concerned. "When we go inside, let me do the talking. Don't argue with Roberto, don't make demands, don't do anything that might escalate the situation. I know that's hard when your sister is involved, but I need you to trust me to handle this." "Can you do that?" Lily nodded, her throat too tight for words, and followed Vincenzo up the front steps. The men on the porch moved aside to let them pass, their expressions neutral, but their postures alert. And suddenly, they were inside and moving through a hallway toward voices coming from somewhere deeper in the house. Roberto was in the kitchen, which seemed absurdly domestic for a man who was holding a 19-year-old girl against her will. He was older than Vincenzo, maybe mid-40s, with graying hair and a compact build that suggested either military training or serious gym dedication. But it was the coldness in his eyes when he looked at Lily that made her understand why Vincenzo had warned her to let him handle this. This was not a man who would be moved by tears or pleas or appeals to basic humanity. "Vincenzo," Roberto said, his voice carrying a faint accent that might have been Eastern European. "I wasn't expecting you, and you brought company." "This is Lily Winters," Vincenzo said smoothly, moving slightly in front of Lily in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Chloe's sister. She came to me asking for help finding her sister, and I'm here to ask you to release Chloe into my custody." Roberto's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes that suggested he was calculating odds and assessing threats. "Why would I do that? The girl saw something she shouldn't have. Until I'm satisfied she's not a danger to my operations, she stays here." "Because I'm offering you my personal guarantee," Vincenzo said, and there was steel beneath the calm words. "I will vouch for Chloe's silence. If she becomes a problem, I will handle it personally. That's worth more than keeping a frightened teenager locked in your safe house, Roberto. You know it is." "Your guarantee," Roberto repeated, his eyes moving between Vincenzo and Lily with open speculation. "That's a significant thing to offer for a girl you've never met. What's your interest in this, Vincenzo? Why do you care what happens to some waitress who was stupid enough to overhear a business conversation?" "Because her sister showed up at my gate refusing to leave until I helped her," Vincenzo said, and there was something almost admiring in his voice despite the tension of the situation. "Because I respect that kind of courage and loyalty, and because I'm asking you, as a favor between associates, to release Chloe and accept my guarantee of her silence." The silence that followed felt dangerous, and Lily found herself holding her breath while Roberto considered the request. She could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, the assessment of whether Vincenzo's guarantee was worth the risk of releasing a potential witness, and she could see the moment he decided, his expression shifting into something that wasn't quite agreement, but wasn't outright refusal either. "I'll release the girl," Roberto said slowly. "But I want your guarantee in writing, Vincenzo. A formal agreement that if she talks, if she goes to the police or the media or anyone else, you will handle it. And by handle it, we both know what I mean." Lily felt sick at the implication, at the casual discussion of what would happen to Chloe if she violated this forced silence, but Vincenzo's expression didn't change. "Agreed. Draw up the paperwork. I'll sign it." Roberto nodded and gestured toward one of his men standing in the doorway. "Bring the girl down." The minutes while they waited felt like hours, and Lily's heart was racing so fast she felt lightheaded. Beside her, Vincenzo stood with that same controlled stillness that suggested coiled tension beneath the calm exterior, and she found herself unconsciously moving closer to him, drawn by the sense of safety his presence provided, despite the dangerous circumstances. Then Chloe was there, emerging from a doorway followed by one of Roberto's men, and Lily's careful control shattered. Her sister looked exhausted and frightened, but physically unharmed, her blonde hair pulled into a messy ponytail and her eyes red from crying. When Chloe saw Lily, her face crumpled, and she ran across the kitchen, throwing herself into Lily's arms with a sob. "I'm so sorry," Chloe whispered against Lily's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Lily. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just overheard something I shouldn't have, and I got scared and I didn't know what to do." "It's okay," Lily murmured, holding her sister tight and trying to project a calm she absolutely didn't feel. "It's okay. We're going to go home now. Everything's going to be okay." But even as she said the words, Lily knew they were a lie. Nothing was okay. Chloe had witnessed something criminal, and now both of them were bound to silence by an agreement Vincenzo was signing with Roberto that would have consequences if violated. They were trapped in a world of moral compromise and dangerous men, and the only thing standing between them and those consequences was Vincenzo Moretti, a man Lily had known for less than a day, but who had just put himself on the line to protect two women he barely knew. As they left the safe house, Chloe safely between Lily and Vincenzo, Lily caught Vincenzo's gaze and saw something complicated in his expression, something that suggested this wasn't over, that the agreement he had made would bind them together in ways she didn't yet understand. And despite every instinct screaming at her to be wary, to maintain distance, to protect herself and her sister from further entanglement with organized crime, Lily found herself grateful that Vincenzo Moretti had opened his gates to a desperate woman demanding help. Because sometimes survival meant accepting protection from dangerous men. And sometimes the most unexpected alliances were forged in moments of desperation. 2 weeks later, Lily stood in Vincenzo's study again, but this time she had come voluntarily, rather than storming his gates in desperation. Chloe was safe at home, having quit her job at Eclipse and enrolled in additional classes to make up for the ones she had missed during her ordeal. The nightmares were fading gradually, and her sister was beginning to smile again, to plan for the future without the weight of fear crushing her spirit. But Lily couldn't shake the sense of obligation she felt toward Vincenzo, or the awareness that he had put himself at risk for women who were strangers to him. She had spent 2 weeks trying to figure out how to thank him properly, how to express gratitude for something that couldn't be measured in conventional ways, and finally decided that the only thing she could offer was honesty. "I wanted to thank you," she said, when Vincenzo gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs across from his desk, "for everything you did for Chloe and me, for believing me when I showed up making demands, for using your influence to get her released, for—" "You don't need to thank me," Vincenzo interrupted gently. "I did what needed to be done." "But why?" Lily leaned forward, searching his face for answers. "You barely knew us. You had no obligation to help, and you put yourself in a difficult position with Roberto by vouching for Chloe. Why would you do that for strangers?" Vincenzo was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her with that same intensity that made her acutely aware of him in ways that had nothing to do with fear. "Because when you stormed my gates refusing to leave without your sister, you reminded me of someone I lost, someone who was brave and fierce, and would have done exactly what you did if the situation were reversed. And because I've spent many years making compromises and accepting that violence and fear are just parts of my world, helping you and Chloe, that was a chance to do something good for once. To be better than my reputation suggests I am." The vulnerability in his words took Lily's breath away, and suddenly the distance between them felt like too much space. She stood and moved around the desk, drawn by something she didn't entirely understand, and found herself standing close enough to Vincenzo that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You are better than your reputation," she said quietly. "You saved my sister. You protected us when you didn't have to. That makes you a good man, Vincenzo, regardless of what else you do in your life." Vincenzo's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone in a gesture that was both tender and charged with something that made Lily's pulse race. "Stay," he said softly. "Not because you owe me, not out of obligation, but because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since you left. Because you showed me what courage looks like, and I want more of that in my life. Because when I look at you, Lily, I see someone worth protecting, someone worth—" He stopped himself, but Lily knew what he had been about to say. Someone worth loving. And despite every rational reason she could think of why getting involved with Vincenzo Moretti was a terrible idea, despite the danger and the complications and the moral compromise it represented, Lily found herself leaning into his touch and whispering, "Okay, I'll stay." And as Vincenzo pulled her close and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that felt like promise and hope, and the beginning of something unexpected, Lily allowed herself to believe that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was accept protection from dangerous men, and sometimes love found you in the most impossible circumstances, forged from desperation and courage, and the fierce determination to protect the people who mattered most.